Mr. Inazawa spent his childhood in a regional city in Hokkaido and left his hometown for higher education upon graduation. He went on to a university in Sapporo and later worked for a medical company there. His ties to his hometown were almost completely severed except for 2 visits a year, the Bon Festival during summer and New Year's. When he turned 40, Mr. Inazawa was no longer living with his wife. Although he did not have a wife and children, he was leading a fulfilling life balancing his hobbies and work. Sometimes he would feel loneliness because he was single, but he enjoyed the freedom and his growing savings. In his middle age, he was beginning to get fat as a working member of society, and he would indulge himself in his hobby of fishing when he needed to relax his mind. It was unexpected and sudden that he received the news of his mother's death. She was already over 70, he said, but she had no chronic illnesses and was always in good health when we saw her, so my brothers and I had let our guard down. His mother had slipped and fell from an icy pedestrian bridge in winter, hit her head on the pavement, and died. Mr. Inazawa returned to his hometown for the funeral, where he and his brothers discussed what to do with the family home. Unfortunately, his father had passed away from a serious illness when his sons were around 20 years old, so there would be no one left to live there. However, he could not quit his current job to inherit the house, and all of his brothers except Mr. Inazawa had wives and children. In the end, everyone decided that it was impossible for them to move, so they decided to sell the whole house. He informed his workplace of the situation and took an extended leave of absence while he worked on cleaning up his parents' house. As Mr. Inazawa was sorting through his old room that had now turned into a storage space, he came across an old school yearbook. It was an elementary school graduation book. It is common for people to find nostalgic items while cleaning, but this kind of distraction is the most time-consuming of all, since most people cannot resist the urge to go through it. Mr. Inazawa was no exception, so he stopped to flip through the yearbook and began to immerse in his childhood. There were those he had never seen since graduation, and others he has somehow continued to still have contact with. The ones he disliked at the time, the ones he made fun of behind their backs, the teachers who were funny and popular. As he gazed at the page of his classmates' names and photos, Mr. Inazawa suddenly noticed something. Eriko was not there. She was a cheerful girl, always smiling and laughing. She had big round eyes and was friendly to everyone. Naturally, being popular with the boys, some even had serious crushes on her. When it came to sharing secrets, her name would pop up every time since somebody was always in love with her. Of course, Mr. Inazawa was one of them. He remembered the itchy yet bittersweet feeling he had for Eriko, who was cheerful all the time. She was definitely the first love of his life. However, neither the name nor the face of Eriko, who holds such fond memories for him, was not in the photo book. He wondered if the faculty had forgotten to include her name in the book by mistake, but her name was also missing from the section where the students wrote messages to the class and essays about their ambitions for the future. Mr. Inazawa wondered what was going on, and as he tried to remember, he came up with a possibility. At the time, he didn't have any doubts at all, but now that he thought about it again, his memories of Eriko were a little strange. First of all, he didn't remember seeing Eriko outside the classroom. That was not the only strange thing about the memory. The first thing to remember was that Eriko always got up from her seat and spoke to him first with her usual smile, regardless of whether the class was in session or not. He would respond to her as if it was lunch break, and he didn't remember his homeroom teacher getting mad at him for it. I was starting to wonder if she was a manifestation of my imagination, an imaginary friend, or so I thought at first, he recalls. But if that's the case, there's something strange. Mr. Inazawa does indeed remember talking about Eriko with other classmates. It was the same when him and his friends were talking and gossip, who likes who, and he also remembered that Eriko came to him when he was playing with some of his friends. Although it was possible that his brain had changed his memory in a way that was convenient for his young fantasies, but he was still somewhat curious and decided to contact one of his friends. Him and Mr. Yada go way back since elementary school, and this boy had a proper face and name in the graduation photo in front of him. It was easy to get in touch with him, as they still go out for drinks together when Mr. Inazawa go back home. When Mr. Yada answered the phone and Mr. Inazawa asked him a question, he laughed and said, "I remember Eriko, of course. You and I both had a huge crush on her, didn't we? I think it's..." As Mr. Inazawa thought, it was not just his imagination. He immediately started to confront Mr. Yada about the absence of Eriko in his graduation photo book and the unnaturalness of his memories of her. But Mr. Yada was having none of it, saying things like, "You're thinking too much," and "Are you trying to be a horror writer or something?" He would not take him seriously at all. Mr. Inazawa reminded him to look at the photo book later and hung up the phone. But a few hours later, Mr. Yada called him again and said, "I looked at the photo book, but Eriko she's really not there." From there, the two of them discussed the possibilities. Maybe Eriko had simply transferred to a different school without waiting for graduation. Or Eriko had died of an illness or accident, which shocked them so much that they had erased it from their memory. The simplest answer might be that she belonged in another class, hence not having her photo on their class page. But somehow, none of them felt correct. It's hard to believe that they would forget such a big event as their first love transferring to another school, and although there was a boy who died in their class, there was a section in the photo book memorializing him. Even if Eriko had died while in school, it's strange that only one person is forgotten or taken out. It would be hard to mistake a child in a different grade for a classmate, and above all, none of these possibilities could dispel the irrationality revolving around the memory of a girl named Eriko. The theory that it might have been a kind of mass hysteria seemed the most reasonable, but it also left something unexplained. Could it be one of those Mandela effects? Mr. Inazawa thought. Was it like the yokai Zashiki Warashi, that girl? Mr. Yada said. In the end, after a long phone call, it was decided that this possibility, which Mr. Yada suddenly divulged, was probably correct. It was an unscientific conclusion, but Mr. Inazawa didn't feel bad about it. It would be a gentle way of dropping the matter. It would have been peaceful if this issue had ended there. However, Mr. Yada seemed to be so excited by the unexpected mystery that he called Mr. Inazawa the next day and said, "I called some of the people who were still in the area, and some of them remembered Eriko. Let's gather up and have a drink somewhere. You're still not going back to the city, are ya?" Having come to the conclusion that Eriko was like a yokai would maybe be laughed at by everyone, but Mr. Inazawa had no particular reason to refuse, and the idea of being reunited with classmates he hadn't seen in decades seemed appealing in its own way. After he responded that he would join the party, Mr. Yada made the arrangements for the date, and about 5 people, including the 2 of them, went to a private izakaya for a drinking party. At first, everyone seemed a little distant, but they were the kind of people who would have jumped at such a sudden invitation. The tension soon ebbed, and they began to have friendly conversations, which did not feel as if several decades had passed without seeing each other. They were frankly having a great time talking about their own personal stories, such as where they are working right now or how they won the lottery and bought a condo. However, when Mr. Yada brought up the subject of Eriko, one of them blatantly lost all expression. "I remember Eriko too," he said. "I remember her, but it's strange. I had forgotten about her until Yada called me and told me. I probably haven't thought about her since I graduated. I've never recalled her since, but when I heard her name from Yada, all the things I'd forgotten about suddenly started pouring into me." The atmosphere in the room became a little heavy as he sipped his sake after his comment. Mr. Inazawa thought he could relate to him. It's true he had also forgotten about Eriko until he opened the yearbook that day. "It's strange, isn't it? It seems like you could have talked about your first love at some point in your life until then," he said. "But Eriko was cute, wasn't she?" When Mr. Yada said that, perhaps trying to change the atmosphere, the group somewhat relaxed. The guy who had expressed his fears about Eriko also found himself saying, "She's cute, but she was also nice. Her friendliness made everyone fall in love with her." The momentary mood of uneasiness turned into a gentle conversation about memories of the mysterious friend from childhood, as the drinks went down and everyone got drunk. "Hey, why don't each of us try drawing a picture of that girl?" Mr. Yada suggested, pulling out notepaper and ballpoint pens for everyone from his bag. Of course we weren't trying to draw a portrait or anything, but just for fun at the bar. If everyone agreed that Eriko was there, then it would mean that she really existed, and if not, then it would be a mystery that would give us more topics for conversation. Everyone got a piece of paper and a pen and began doodling. After everyone had completed their drawings, they put them out on the table. "Well, I guess you're there after all, Eriko." We all drew the same picture. A cute and thin one-piece outfit and her long waist-length hair, her frail and petite build, a cute mouth that was always smiled wryly, and her face. Her face was covered in big, round eyes all over. Needless to say, everyone froze. All of them didn't think anything strange when they were drawing her. Even though their memories were so vivid that they could draw it as soon as they were told to do so, the moment they saw the image drawn by someone else's hand, the magic was suddenly gone. "It was magic," Mr. Inazawa said. "Eriko had cast a spell on us, and we broke that magic that night." The party soon came to an end. Mr. Inazawa says he's had no contact with Mr. Yada or any of his former classmates since then. "And I think it's the same for all of them," he said with a fatigued look on his face. "I just can't get her face out of my head." No matter what he was doing, even at work, when he's not thinking about anything, her face comes back into his mind. He says he can't forget Eriko's face with a friendly smile on her mouth and countless eyes like pimples blinking independently. "What am I going to do now?" he says. Mr. Inazawa is currently in the care of a relative, having quit his long-time job due to a physical breakdown caused by the strain of his work. The elementary school he attended and spent time with Eriko is still in the same location.